Hi there, welcome to episode 2 of the National Parks Photography Program. I'm Danilo, your host, and today we're going to be talking about Olympic National Park. So, Olympic National Park takes up the bulk of the Olympic Peninsula in northwest Washington, and it's between Puget Sound and the Pacific Ocean near Seattle. That's probably where you'd fly into if you're headed there and you're not driving. But to get from Seattle over to Olympic, not the most direct thing. You can take ferries across Puget Sound. You can drive south through Tacoma and Olympia and around. That's actually what my wife and I did. Olympic was founded as a national monument by Teddy Roosevelt in 1909 as Mount Olympus National Monument. And it was promoted to national park by Franklin Roosevelt in 1938 and named a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1981. It's our 25th national park, or 25th oldest. There are some parks that were like the Holy Cross National Park isn't any longer. So it's our 25th oldest national park. It has 3 distinct ecosystems, and we'll be getting into those later. It's got high mountains, alpine meadows, and that sort of ecosystem. It's got rainforest, and it has some beautiful 73 miles of Pacific coastline. 95% of the park is a designated wilderness. Other notable things about the area, the largest town is Port Angeles, so that's on the north side of the park. And it's just outside of the main park headquarters, or the main park headquarters is just outside of Port Angeles. And straight out of there is the road up 10,000 feet to Hurricane Ridge, which is one of the most popular sites in the park. And then Forks, Washington is not quite on the coast, but it's near the coast over on the west end of the park. And for all the Twilight fans, that's where that's all based. I was actually kind of surprised. I was really scared. I'm not a Twilight reader. I was expecting it to be like super cheesy, over the top Twilight stuff when we got into Forks, and it wasn't. There's a couple things, but it's not like you're going to get beat over the head. So if you're a Twilight fan, there's things for you to do there, and if you're not a Twilight fan, you're not going to get overwhelmed by it. So my own experience in Olympic then comes just over a year ago. It was September of 2014. My wife and I have some friends in Seattle, and we have some friends and relatives in San Francisco. So we decided to fly out to Seattle, rent a car, and then drive south through Washington and Oregon and Northern California to San Francisco. So we had 2 days really in Olympic, which is just like clearly not enough time. But we hit a lot of stuff. It was a packed trip. So it was one of those sort of exploratory trips where we hit, aside from the cities, we hit Olympic, Crater Lake, and Redwoods National Park. And then, having gotten a taste of those, now the urge is really strong to go back and spend more time, especially Olympic. It is such a diverse park. And each of those 3 ecosystems I mentioned earlier are worthy of national park status just like on their own. So when you add them up and you only have 2 days there, it's really not enough time you could spend. I mean, I think a week is sort of the minimum that you would need to be there to really get a good feeling for the park. And you could spend, well, any of these parks you could spend a lifetime at exploring and seeing new things. As I said, we drove, we went through Olympia, and then west to Aberdeen, and then up into the rainforest along the coast that way. And then, so our first stop was in the Hoh Rainforest, and then we went out to the coast for a sunset there, and then stayed overnight in Port Angeles, and then up to Hurricane Ridge the next day. So we did have experience in all of the different areas of the park, but I've got to go back. It's amazing. So I'm going to start going through those 3 areas, and giving my thoughts, just sort of my impressions of what worked for me in terms of the photography, and what things I thought were important to have with me and keep in mind as I was going through that. I've got my trusty park brochure here. I'm a collector of these, so I keep one for just about, sometimes you can't find one or you don't get to the visitor center, but for just about every park I've been to, I keep one of these, and then, because I'm a nerd that way. That's basically what it comes down to. But it's great because then if I have friends who are going to the park, I can lend them my brochure so they have it when they get there, and hopefully, they'll bring me back an even newer one in case there's been any changes. Or sometimes people who just know I love the parks will visit and they'll bring me back a brochure for a park even if I haven't been there, which is great. Especially a couple years ago we were in Acadia during the government shutdown, and former coworker of mine, Trudy, gave me her Acadia park map ahead of time, and I was the only person in the park who had one, and people were very jealous. So good resources to have. So as I said, the first of the 3 ecosystems that I hit was the Hoh Rainforest. And you can get there, you take US 101, either if you're coming down from Port Angeles or up from Aberdeen. And there's a few different ranger stations that you can hit along the way. I would love to spend more time at those. We just didn't have time. So the Hoh Rainforest is about midway north to south into the park. And then I believe it was like 18 miles or something. Yeah, I think it was about 18 miles into the Hoh Visitor Center, give or take. From 101, you head back east into the park. The park occupies most of the peninsula, or at least a good chunk of it. But it's kind of centralized. There's the one coastal area along the Pacific coast on the west side, which is park. Most of the rest is towns and communities. You're sort of driving 101 around the park, and then taking spur roads in, and the Hoh Rainforest Visitor Center is at the end of one of those, and it's a beautiful, beautiful drive in. So once we got there, we did 2 things. They have a sort of mile-ish loop trail you can do, which is beautiful, and that has the highlights of that sort of particular area of rainforest. And you have to go up a hill. It's not like super accessible, but it's not exactly grueling either. So if you just did that, you would have a really good feeling for what that sort of rainforest area is all about, and you could do that in an hour. Obviously not the most in-depth, but beautiful little trail. And then there's a trail that follows, a longer trail that follows the Hoh River back from the rainforest east into the park. And you can take that connects up with other trails, and I mean, as I said earlier, most of this interior is wilderness. You could literally get lost in there, but figuratively, you could go in and spend days hiking through there. You can connect from the rainforest up to Hurricane Ridge. Lots of different things you could do there. So what my wife and I did was started there, and we probably made about a 10-mile hike of it. Hiked in 5 miles. There is a waterfall. It wasn't a real big waterfall, and that wasn't the point of the exercise. But there was a waterfall that if you go about 5-6 miles in, you can get a view of. And the trail comes out along the river and gives you some nice views there as well. But the real highlight of the thing is the rainforest. And so probably the first mile or 2 of that trail is the section that's in the really dense rainforest, and just beautiful and amazing. So the things that really benefited me, get this, it was raining in the rainforest. So I started out, I was shooting with a Sony A77 at the time. And so everything was weather sealed and fine that way. And I had the 16 to 50, the kit lens, which is a really nice kit lens on there. The biggest challenge I had is it's dark. I mean, it is so dense. That rainforest, I believe I read it's it's in terms of sort of volume of biomass, it's the densest ecosystem in the world. So with the tree cover and the just all of the growth, the lush growth, it was a real challenge getting enough light. And then you add in overcast skies, and you don't have the brightest light anyway. So that was one of the things that stuck me out. Is without a tripod, there's no shooting at 200 ISO or 100 ISO or anything like that. Handheld, I had to be at a minimum of 800, which with that Sony was kind of pushing where it gets really noisy. So that was one of the challenges I had. The second big challenge I had is that it's so dense spatially. I mean, obviously it's dense with growth, but you get into these beautiful rainforest areas, and it's not open spaces, even as forests go. It's not open spaces. And so shooting with that 16 to 50, it gives at the wide end, it gives a 24 millimeter equivalent focal length. And it was just really hard to capture anything. So, I was able to shoot some sort of like detail stuff, but even then, it's just so dense. It's hard to like isolate one thing out. You can do it, but it's just a real a tricky place until I switched over to an ultra wide. I at the time had a Sigma. It was an 8 to 16, so it's a rectilinear equivalent focal length of 12 millimeters, and that was finally the lens that allowed me to open up the spaces and really sort of capture the images that I felt best represented the rainforest. It made some tricks in terms of bright sky and dark undergrowth, so balancing out that exposure was really key. If you have a tripod, shooting HDR isn't a bad idea in there, because it does help that would help even some of those things out. So that's what it was for me, using that wide angle lens, finding a really good foreground, finding a subject so that there's a definable center of focal point of the image, but then filling it with that ultra wide angle really worked well. So if you have access to an ultra wide, I would recommend it. If you're patient enough to bring in a tripod, it's a good place for one. I generally don't shoot off tripods, and probably if that's a place, if I was going back in there, I would bring one, just because not every shot I'd use it, but it'd be useful to have. Program note, in the next episode of NP₃, I'll be diving into very specifically one of my favorite image from the Hoh Rainforest, and I'll put a preview up of it right now. And so we'll go sort of more into step by step how I saw, composed, and processed this particular photo. So stay tuned for that coming up soon. Moving on, heading back out to US 101, a bit north through Forks, and then you head east to the coastline, and there's just this beautiful area of Pacific coast. I mean, there's miles and miles of it, but this area out by Rialto Beach is just as spectacular a stretch of coastline as you'll find. When you get out there, there's Rialto Beach just to the north. There's a fork in the road. You take the slightly more northerly road, and that brings you out to Rialto Beach. And then if you take State 110, continue on 110 south, you'll get to First Beach, Second Beach, and Third Beach. And that's where we headed. All of these have the beach, and then out just off of shore there's the sea stacks. So it's just a beautiful, rugged coastline. If you head down to First, Second, and Third Beaches, the road will take you straight to First Beach. Just before First Beach, there's a little parking area, and there's about a 3/4 of a mile trail that takes you to Second Beach, and then a longer trail. It was a few miles. It's not super long, but there's a few miles long trail that takes you down to Third Beach. we selected Second Beach because just having that trail gets you away from, I mean, this is a really popular place, especially at sunset. It's a really crowded place. But having that 3/4 mile trail will get you away from most of those people. There were probably a handful of people out at Second Beach as well. But much more peaceful. And if you just walk down the beach a little bit, you can get some solitude even there. And then we were able to head back with headlamps through the woods. It was dark by the time especially in the woods, it was dark by the time we got back to the car. But that sort of, for us, was a doable way of getting sunset that's not so crowded. The thing to be looking for as a photographer is foregrounds. There's quite a bit of stuff there. There's a lot of driftwood that gets washed up, so some of that's just real old, twisted driftwood can make for real good foregrounds. Pebbles on the beach can work well for foregrounds, and the wave patterns as the waves wash ashore can work really good as a foreground in these sorts of images. Keep in mind that when the tide comes in, it comes in fast. So NOAA, and I'll put a link in the description, NOAA will publish ahead of time a list of high tide and low tide times for every day. And that's really, plan your visit to the beaches out for that. It's going to be, you don't want to be there at high tide. I mean, depending on where you go, it might be all right. But in terms of getting out on the beach, you don't want to be there at high tide. Where you want to be is either as the tide is headed out or near low tide. You don't want to be there after low tide as the tide's coming in, because if you get yourself in the wrong spot, I mean, there's cliffs that you have to walk around and things like that, which when the tide's out aren't a problem, but you could get yourself stuck in a bad situation if you had no awareness of. It's not dangerous if you plan, but have some awareness of what the tides are. The other thing, and at Second Beach we didn't see any of these, but then when the tide goes out, there's tide pools, so you might find these little pools with starfish or other sea life that are really interesting as foregrounds. And then the other consideration is we were there at sunset, which works really great. You get the beautiful setting sun, obviously, and then these sea stacks silhouetted against the beautiful sky. So you have hopefully a interesting foreground, a nice jagged silhouettes of the sea stacks, and then the beautiful colors in the background, and that works really well. Sunrise would also be a good time. There's a little issue getting direct light because of the cliffs that are just on shore, but especially in the pre-dawn light, I think there's probably some amazing photo opportunities there. That sky, pre-dawn opposite the sun, in most places, especially I would think with the heavy sea air, probably gets a really rich purple color, pink color. And you'd have more light on the sea stacks themselves. So you could probably do, especially HDR photography with the moving waves and the sea stacks and the beautiful sky. If you catch a clear day, or a day where there's clouds moving in but haven't gotten in yet, where that sun would light the clouds from underneath. So beautiful opportunities at either end of the day at the beaches, and who doesn't want to be on the beach? So great place. Then finally there's the alpine, the mountainous ecosystem in the park, and I visited that at Hurricane Ridge. That's the most common, most popular mountainous alpine part of the park, main visitor center, or a big visitor center up there. You catch that out of Port Angeles, you literally straight uphill out of town, and you get there. And the day we were there, it was sort of half overcast. It was completely overcast, but how low those clouds were. It was sort of half fogged in, or half, things might open up a little bit. It wasn't, a great day for photography. It was beautiful for a hike. We really enjoyed ourselves, but it wasn't, you couldn't really get the sweeping vistas that Hurricane Ridge is known for, which that brings me to one of the key tips for visiting Hurricane Ridge and Olympic, is if you have more time there, the thing to do is to prioritize Hurricane Ridge and the alpine sections for like your first nice clear days. You know, the rainforest, it doesn't really matter so much. It's a rainforest. So, you know, if it's overcast and rainy and dreary there, that's just what you've come for. That's what you expect. But if you catch that, you might only get one day or part of one day where Hurricane Ridge opens up. And so you need to really make sure you catch that as soon as you can on your visit. Once you're there, you know, it's like the Great Mountains, you know, it's like Glacier, or I would imagine some of the Alaska parks are like, in terms of what you're trying to do as a photographer. Slightly different views, but you know, you're looking for foregrounds. If you're there, or we were there in the fall, if you're there earlier in the year, there's lots of wildflowers in the meadows, so I mean, that's perfect. You know, looking for, you know, maybe a little ravine or anything like that to help create a leading line to draw the eye into the picture, or even one of the trails themselves. Those can work great as lines helping draw into the pictures. But yeah, you're sort of using those, you know, equivalent of 36, 24 millimeter wider angles very often, and shooting just the big sweeping mountain scenes, and what could be more lovely than that. So so that was kind of what I had for my overview of Olympic National Park. Like I said, I only had 2 days there, and you can do it, and we actually did feel like we had, you know, a good taste of the park, but it's really a park that wants you to be there for longer than that. You know, I'd say at least 2 days in each of the 3 ecosystems would be just an introduction still on its own. So, you know, a week-long trip there is definitely time well spent. Amazing, amazing park, and near the top of my list of ones I have to get back to and spend more time at. So, if you like this video, I appreciate that, and if you want to see more like them, you could subscribe and down below, and you'll make sure you'll see all of my new videos when they come up. The next video is going to be that deep dive into my favorite image from the Hoh Rainforest, and kind of go into the whole process of how that was made, and that'll give a sort of more in-depth look at just one of the best sites, best views from Olympic National Park. And otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.